implement CCPA targets and provisions. It would develop a comprehensive greenhouse gas emissions data inventory, which we really need. It needs to be updated annually, and importantly, it includes emissions associated with imports, which a real problem I have with our seeker review process and the requirements is it's not considered, they don't consider the whole life cycle of those fossil fuel projects. It creates a broadly representative climate justice working group to identify communities for co-pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions reductions and climate-related investment opportunities. It directs at least 40% of the funding to accessing clean energy resources for low to moderate income households and environmental justice communities. And it sets labor standards and requirements. That's kind of the main provisions of it. There are other pieces of legislation also that have been introduced to address the climate crisis. We're focusing on this one, but if there are bills or provisions of other bills that you think are important, please raise them in this hearing. So we're really looking forward to getting your input on this. I'm really thrilled that my colleague, Senator Skoufis, has joined us. We have been a real team working together in the state Senate for the Hudson Valley, and it's been a really great pleasure to work with them. And I'm just going to turn it over to him.
My pleasure to join you in the heart of Jen's district and in the heart of really the state's environmental movement here in Paltz. And as Jen closed, I'll open by saying that she and I speak almost every single day, and we have developed an incredible partnership and friendship on behalf of the people in this room and everyone else we represent. This morning we had a budget hearing together down in Orange County. I dubbed us, I don't know if she likes the name or not, but the Killer Jays, James and Jen. And look, this is an incredibly consequential issue. You all know that by being here. But it's even more consequential for us in New York, because like so many issues, the federal government is dropping the ball. And it would be bad enough if the federal government was doing nothing, but the federal government is actually doing active harm on this issue and more broadly the environmental issues. And look, we're one of a small handful of countries that are no longer in the Paris Treaty. I think along with countries like Iran. It's generally, like as a general rule, if you're in a group of countries that includes Iran, it's usually a bad thing. But even more recently, the National Security Council, I'm sure some of you know, it's been reported that they're putting together this secret panel to actually undo the government's official policy of recognizing climate change as real and a threat. And of course, the leader of the secret panel is a climate change denier. And so it's even more incumbent than ever for us here in the States and here in New York to pick up the ball. And that ball takes the form of the CCPA. I come from the Assembly. We passed this bill a number of years in a row. My full expectation is that they will pass it again in the Assembly. It's up to us to really build the momentum that's required. I think we're doing that to bring it to a vote in the state Senate and hopefully compel the governor to sign it. We need to get to 100%. By 2050, the latest. Hopefully we can even do it sooner than that. But that starts by enacting this bill. And I think we've developed a pretty strong sort of consortium of supporters, not just on the environmental side, but also organized labor. Much of their movement is behind this bill. And so now we just need to make sure our voices are heard loud and clear, starting with events like this. So we look forward to hearing your testimony, and I suspect there are going to be negotiations on this bill. We need to hear about specific elements, what are important to you, and ultimately just need to get the job done. So thank you for being here. Look forward to listening.
I don't want to set a bad precedent by going out of order, but I would like to bring up the one representative of the generation that's growing up to just say, if she would be interested in saying just a few words.
Can we just stand right here?
Sure.
Tight together.
Sure.
Okay.
I think climate change is important for New York and the USA so that future generations will have a healthy environment to live in and have a sustainable jobs and lives so that people can live healthy.
Okay, so I'm actually going to call you up 3 at a time because it's very tight. Please watch your head. We don't want anybody passing out by hitting the wood over there. Use your outside voice since we don't have microphones. And please make sure that your testimony sticks to the CCPA. I know there's lots of things that people want to talk about, but that is the purpose of these hearings. So if you could keep your testimony to the purpose of these hearings, we'd appreciate it. So I'm going to call up first Adriana Nasolis, Nicholas Moran, and Jess Mullen. And Adriana will begin, and then if the other two could just stand nearby.
Thank you. Oh, there's no mic.
No.
So I'm Adriana Natsoulis, the Executive Director of NOFA New York, which is the Northeast Organic Farming Association of New York. And we're pleased to have this opportunity to provide testimony in support of the Climate and Community Protection Act. And we'd like to thank Senators Metzger and Skoufis for providing.
That's okay. Skoufis, yeah.
Skoufis, sorry. For the invitation and for holding this hearing. So, to give a little background, NOFA New York was founded in 1983. We are the premier statewide organization growing a strong, sustainable agriculture movement in New York State. Woo-hoo! And it's part of a regional network of 7 Northeast Organic Farming Associations. NOFA New York provides education and assistance to local organic and sustainable farmers, connects consumers with organic and sustainable farmers, advocates for policies that support a sustainable food and farm system at both the state and federal levels. And we are also the largest USDA accredited organic certifier in New York State, certifying over 1,000 organic operations across New York. So the CCPA is a comprehensive bill that begins to address issues around climate change in New York. And so NOFA New York would like to encourage the framers of this legislation to consider it additionally as an opportunity to support land use practices specifically in agriculture that provide both energy efficiency and the sequestration of large amounts of carbon. Worldwide, organic regenerative agriculture has been documented to mitigate climate change as well as provide land and farmers with the ability to adapt to climate change. So how does this happen? How does organic agriculture mitigate against climate change? 3 different ways. 1, reducing greenhouse gases, especially nitrous oxide, since no chemical nitrogen fertilizers are used and nutrient losses are minimized. 2, storing large amounts of carbon and plant biomass by building organic matter, encouraging agroforestry and forbidding the clearance of primary ecosystems. And by 3, minimizing energy consumption by 30 to 70% per unit of land by eliminating the energy required to manufacture synthetic fertilizers and by using internal farm inputs, thus reducing fuel used for transportation. How does organic agriculture help to adapt to climate change? 3 reasons again that I'm giving you today. Through practices of building the health of the soil, organic soils are more resilient to floods, droughts, and land degradation processes. 2, by preserving seed and crop diversity. Crops are more able to resist pests and disease while not using fossil fuel-based pesticides. Building diversity also helps farmers evolve new cropping systems to adapt to climatic changes. And 3, organic agriculture minimizes risk as a result of sustainable yield and lower production rates and costs. So you've asked us, well, how can you improve this wonderful CCPA? And I have some recommendations on what you can do. So the CCPA refers generally to sustainable practices. Note that New York would like to see the bill include agriculture and land use practices using organic regenerative practices which build soil, that sequester carbon, reduce fossil fuel inputs, and generally values the contribution of agriculture to climate change mitigation. So support agricultural practices that are part of the solution, that is organic regenerative practices that actually sequester large amounts of carbon rather than incentivizing the continuation of some of the more polluting agricultural systems that create methane. Move towards 100% renewable energy and the sitting of solar installations. 3, sequester more carbon through organic regenerative practices on both agricultural land and large parklands. And finally, organic farmers support community control of energy sources rather than leaving solar and wind development solely to big corporations. We have copies of ran through those last 4 points, but you can read the entire testimony and, of course, contact Open New York if you'd like more information. And I look forward to more conversations with the two of you. Thank you again for this time.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Moran. I'm here today as a private citizen speaking in support of the CCPA. But do not think it goes far enough. I have a Master's of Science degree in Environmental Planning from the Berlin Technical University. And while I was there, I studied the Energiewende, the German government's comprehensive energy policy to move the country off fossil fuels. Energiewende is often translated as energy transformation. We need our own energy transformation in New York. So I thank you, Senator Metzger and Senator Skoufis, for holding these hearings on the CCPA. As I said, I don't think it goes far enough. The timeline called for in the CCPA, 50% renewable energy by 2030, is not quick enough. Recent studies have confirmed some researchers' concerns of different natural feedback loops, such as the melting Arctic permafrost and bogs releasing large quantities of methane. Another greenhouse gas source not adequately addressed in these models is the higher leakage rates from frac gas infrastructure in the United States. Here in the Hudson Valley, we have 2 new large frac gas power plants, the CBV, Cricket Valley, with a third advanced camera energy power plant being considered in the start of Article 10 process. Other indicators pointing to a grim future besides the recent extreme weather across the U.S. and across the globe are the decline of insect populations and decline of biodiversity. Yet there are very limited resources available for local governments to take on the task of planning for climate change and regulating renewable energy, as we have home rule in New York State. I work on the Metzger's Clean Energy Communities program and the DC's Climate Smart Communities, and these are great programs, which I believe really lack the resources to make them truly transformational. Local governments continue to struggle with crafting up regional regulations regarding solar photovoltaics. As an example, one proposed solar law that I've seen in the Hudson Valley would limit the amount of PV installed to the current electricity consumption of the site plus 20%. This regulation would limit the ability of homeowners to use their PV system to power switch from fossil fuels to air source heat pumps or to switch to an electric vehicle. In addition, the Public Service Commission seems unable to properly regulate utilities and has allowed the disastrous VDR to move forward. Further frustrating the program is NYSERDA's bureaucracy and its adherence to a neoliberal orthodoxy that grant monies should have a certain return on investment, and that community choice aggregation will miraculously provide all the benefits that a public utility would. We still don't have single billing, so that local solar, community solar projects can be incorporated in an opt-out basis in a community choice aggregation program. Public money should be spent wisely, but the return on investment should be a secondary concern to greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Undervalued should be spent wisely, but the return on investment should be a secondary concern to greenhouse gas emission reduction and undervalues ancillary benefits, as we know that the market will not fund projects whose return on investments are too far off. I also think that Metzger undervalues the electrification, like moving to air source heat pumps. It does not adequately quantify the net harms of gas infrastructure. In the CCPA, there are provisions for market-based solutions. While theoretically setting a price per ton on carbon and creating a marketplace where emissions permits are traded so as to stay below a carbon budget specified are equivalent, I would urge you to avoid the market-based solution. We see market-based solutions in the EU and California, and at worst be rigged, as in the case of the EU, or at best completely fail to perform, as in California. I applaud the creation of an environmental justice advocacy group. As low-income communities and people of color are most impacted by polluting industries, they must be front and center in righting past wrongs. We should take over and purchase the worst performing utilities in the state every year until the citizens of New York own the profits off the energy generation system. Polluting industries have spent too long not cleaning up their act. That's the of the CCPA that a report be authorized for the DEC on barriers to community ownership. Yet I don't think that goes far enough. We should be focusing on democratizing and municipalizing energy utilities. And this brings me to another point that I guess I have concerns over right now, is that with the talk of marijuana legalization, indoor intensive grows will be a huge energy burden on the state. We must prefer outdoor grows and farms, if necessary, require that they use renewable energy for indoor high-intensive grows. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Jess Mullen. I'm going to read a statement on behalf of the Paltz Climate Action Coalition. To give you some background as to who we are, the Paltz Climate Action Coalition is an organization by the people.
Louder, Jess.
For the past 11 years, meetings are held weekly in this room of the Paltz Climate Action Coalition and are open to the public. Our active members are all ages, high school and college students, middle-aged people, all the way up to those living in their twilight their twilight years. Decisions are made by voting in group consensus during meetings, so participants can have ownership and an active contribution to group projects. Our meetings have a range of 8 to 15 attendees each week, plus another 15 to 20 members who participate when their schedule permits. We also have 30 to 40 liaisons from just different grassroots groups around the state with whom we collaborate efforts. We typically have 2 to 4 interns and volunteers from community halls each semester, and there's a climate club on campus that was created by our interns. New Paltz Climate Action Coalition would like to thank Senator Skoufis for his co-sponsorship of the Climate and Community Protection Act. We would like to urge Senator Metzger to co-sponsor this piece of crucial legislation. New Paltz CAC was a regional driving force in the aggressive campaign against fracking in New York, and with much persistence and collaboration, a statewide ban was achieved. However, an energy infrastructure that depends on frack gas from neighboring states like Pennsylvania and West Virginia is being pieced together throughout the state by various companies with global investors. Projects like pipelines, compressor stations, and power plants are being proposed, sometimes built, and if built and when built, these projects will result in the people of New York becoming increasingly dependent on a fossil fuel that they have fought tooth and nail against. New York Independent System Operator System has designated the Hudson Valley as Zone G, and our region has become targeted for its clean air that can make the permitting process easier to build power plants here. We must stop the practice of expanding fossil fuel infrastructure while simultaneously paying lip service to fighting the causes of our climate crisis. Our leaders at the state level must protect their constituents against new pipelines, proposed frack gas power plants like Dan Scammer and Cricket Valley, as well as polluting frack gas plants like the CPB, a project which was built on bribery and corruption. With our region's recent victory of bypass proposed frack gas plants switching to all battery storage,
it is clear that the technology exists for us to store generated power. The next logical step is to make sure that our power is increasingly generated by renewable resources. Additionally, our successful transition from fossil fuel to a sustainable renewable energy economy must include people of all economic backgrounds, color, and gender identity. If our state is going to take the climate crisis seriously, we must also take proper measures to battle this crisis in a tangible and effective manner. The Climate and Community Protection Act has climate commitments that are enforceable and written in law with a timeline, specific benchmarks, fair labor practices, and investment in communities with low-income residents and people of color. This vital legislation cannot be stalled any longer. Since New Paltz Climate Action Coalition is a grassroots organization, we think globally and act locally. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, the global energy transformation driven by renewables can reduce energy-related geopolitical tensions as we know them, and will foster greater cooperation between the states. This transformation can also mitigate social, economic, and environmental challenges that are often among the root causes of geopolitical instability and conflict. Beyond our state and region, let's look at the climate crisis from a macroeconomic standpoint. According to The Guardian in 2015, fossil fuel companies were benefiting from global subsidies of $5.3 trillion, equivalent to $10 million a minute every day. New Paltz Climate Action believes our state must hold polluters financially accountable. Passing legislation that starts with a moderate fee on corporate polluters will provide the revenue necessary to implement programs that are created under the Climate and Community Protection Act. A piece of legislation we also want passed, in addition to this act today, is the Climate and Community Investment Act. New Paltz Climate Action Coalition would like to thank both senators on their tireless work protecting our air, water, health, and environment. And we thank you for providing your constituencies with the opportunity to speak today. We hope that you are both able to persist with passing this legislation swiftly. Thank you.
Okay, next up will be Eli Campbell, Adam Bosch, and Camilla Malik. Again, use your outside voices and keep it to a tight 5 minutes. Come on up.
Hello, everyone. Before I begin my statement, I would like to announce that there will be an organizing meeting tonight at 7 p.m. at Cafeteria on Main Street. There is an international call for climate solidarity action on March 15th, associated with the Friday for Future movement, and potentially millions of students may be striking from school all across the world. I believe we should be demonstrating here in New Paltz. So yeah, Cafeteria, 7 p.m. tonight. Okay, my name is Eli. Thank you for giving me a chance to comment on the Climate and Community Protection Act. At this late stage, we have to do what is practical given the conditions of the moment, but if we compromise and settle for what is easy or politically expedient now, we may not have a later. CCPA is one approach to mitigating the effects of climate change and reducing emissions. Even if corrupt members of Congress and fascists in the White House prevent the Green New Deal from happening at the federal level, we can begin to decarbonize the economy at the state level if CCPA passes and other states use it as a blueprint for legislation. Years. Funding the transition to a sustainable economy by taxing emitters seems to be a winning strategy, but does CCPA go far enough? Could it go further? I believe it could, and I would like to make a few points to that effect. The reduction goals of CCPA are based on setting statewide emissions limits relative to 1990 levels of emissions, which we all know climate change began a lot longer ago than 1990. I believe that taxing polluters for emissions going forward is necessary, but that strategy is decades too late to be adequate by itself. We must hold past emitters retroactively accountable for what they have done to the earth, and CCPA only begins to do this. Second, market-based compliance mechanisms such as a price on carbon dioxide equivalents and tradable emissions allowances are inherently capitalistic solutions, and we cannot rely on market-based thinking alone to avert the crisis that we are in. From Standard Oil to present day, the undeniable historical truth is that American capitalism produced climate change. The Guardian reported in 2017 that just 100 companies produced 71% of global emissions since 1988. The fossil fuel giant Exxon knew that climate change was real and caused by fossil fuel combustion as early as 1977, but did everything in its power to fund climate change denial. Capitalism will not produce the solutions to climate change. 3. CCPA defines leakage as a reduction in emissions of greenhouse gases within the state that is offset by an increase in emissions of greenhouse gases outside of the state. New York State has an indirect leakage problem of utmost significance, which is not really addressed by the CCPA, and that leakage is coming from Wall Street, the center of global capitalism. All of the major financial institutions that crashed the economy in 2007 have significant investments in fossil fuels, not to mention both of the US political parties that dominate our discourse. Wells Fargo and Citibank both made loans of $120 million to the Dakota Access Pipeline. JP Morgan Chase has invested in all 4 of the major tar sands pipeline projects. All of these banks are headquartered in New York. An article from The Guardian in 2018 puts a particular focus on Wall Street's role in the fracking boom of the 2000s. In the early 2000s, the United States was importing most of its oil, but at this point, we are now the largest producer of natural gas in the world, and that is running directly from the financial crisis, which a scholar from Columbia University is quoted in this article saying, the real catalyst of the shale revolution was the 2008 financial crisis and the unprecedentedly low interest rates it ushered in. CNBC reported in 2011 that the total commitment of the Federal Reserve to the bailouts was close to $29 trillion. How did we pay for that? The answer is that we paid for it, and Wall Street invested in fossil fuels since the crash using our tax dollars indirectly. The $7 billion that CCP can generate is a drop in the bucket. This is why taxing polluters alone is not enough. The capitalists who finance the fossil fuel companies must also be held accountable and taxed if for no reason other than simply they have the capital that will be necessary to actually transition the economy. 4. Here's the good news. New York State can take a significant step to stop this dangerous leakage coming from Wall Street. New York State had a stock transfer tax from 1905 to 1981. It is technically still law, but there's also a 100% tax refund that allows traders to not pay it. It's interesting. The way this was accomplished was that in 1979, a 30% refund was created, and then a 60% refund, and then a full refund. So the law is still on the books. All we have to do is stop refunding it. New York State Assembly member Phil Steck, representing the 110th district, has previously called for a partial reinstatement of the tax to pay for infrastructure spending. His proposed legislation would collect 40% of revenue from the tax instead of refunding it, which would provide $16 billion in yearly revenue. That is from a 0.25% tax on stock trading, and all this could be done without passing a new tax. Personally, I think we could and should go further than that. Why not collect 100% of the revenue and use it to fund CCPA? Why not raise the...
Thank you. We have to move on,
Can
sorry.
I just please, I just have one little, I'm so close to finishing, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
We roll it back.
Yes, after all, the richest 10% of Americans own 84% of stocks. That doesn't even get into bonds and derivatives and all the other ways that Wall Street is currently making record profits. We have less than 12 years to get ourselves on the path of net neutral greenhouse gas emissions. The survival of human life on Earth hangs in the balance, and it seems we're finally beginning to act. But all the talking heads are asking, how are we going to pay for it? We aren't going to pay for it. Wall Street will. The capitalists will. We bailed them out. It's their turn now.
I am. How are you? All right, I'm going to use my outdoor voice. Before I begin, I want to thank Senator Metzger and Senator Skoufis for inviting the New York City Department of Environmental Protection to share its insights and our scientific work on climate change during this hearing today in New Paltz. My name is Adam Bosch. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the New York City Water Supply System. Many people in the Catskills and Hudson Valley are familiar with our reservoir system, which is the largest municipal water supply in the United States. Our system is considered a marvel of modern engineering because of its size and scale, but also because it delivers huge quantities of water over long distances by despite gravity alone. The system comprises 19 controlled lakes that have 170 billion gallons of water at full volume. It also includes 392 miles of large aqueducts. New York City's water supply was first turned on in 1842, and since then it has proven to be one of the most important utilities in the state and the country. Today we serve 9.6 million people, including 8.6 million residents of the 5 boroughs in New York City and 1 million people in 72 communities north of the city that draw all or some of their water from the aqueducts, including right here in New Paltz, as you all know. Nearly half of all New Yorkers get their water from the city system, which provides about 1.1 billion gallons of fresh drinking water each day. New York City also operates the largest unfiltered drinking water supply in the United States. That water comes from our Catskill and Delaware systems. They currently have a waiver known as a filtration avoidance determination. This accounts for about 90% of the drinking water that goes to New York City each day. Our Croton system, which accounts for the other 10%, has been filtered since 2015. DEP is proud to be at the forefront of science and research related to drinking water. We belong to a number of national and international scientific groups that study trends in freshwater lakes and reservoirs, emerging challenges in the treatment and protection of drinking water, and the topic that we're here discussing today, climate change. We're fortunate to have more than 100 years of considerable scientific data from the watershed and the reservoirs themselves. That body of data is growing every day. At this point, New York City tests its drinking water about 2 million times each year. That includes about 635,000 analyses that are done each year by our scientists in our 4 water quality laboratories, and about 1.3 million data points that are collected and transmitted annually by our growing network of robotic monitoring equipment on the reservoirs, which I'll add is 100% solar power. These robotic monitors help us to see water quality conditions on our reservoirs in real time. DEP chemists, microbiologists, and research scientists review these data every day to ensure that we are protecting the public health of New Yorkers. It's important to understand that the minute-to-minute and day-to-day operation of this large water supply includes myriad decisions that are always based on this body of sound science that we're constantly gathering. What's more, we often use models to analyze these data and determine the future state of our water supply, which brings me to the topic of climate change. DEP is currently working on one of the most in-depth and complex climate change studies of any water utility in the world. This study is being performed by approximately a half dozen scientists and postdoctorate fellows who work in our Kingston office just north of here. We know that climate change will affect New York City's water supply system through warming air temperatures, a shift in the seasonal pattern of precipitation, which we are already beginning to see and document, and the more frequent occurrence of extreme weather, including droughts and floods. Our study seeks to understand how these changes will affect the water supply and the actions necessary to prepare for it. In the simplest terms, DEP needs to know what weather will occur most often in our watersheds, whether we need to change the way we operate our reservoirs to account for changing weather patterns, and if our infrastructure is adequate to handle these changes in the future. Much of this work depends on models. Over the past decade, more and more people have become familiar with models, especially weather models. I'm sure all of you have watched weather reports where they're talking about whether the Euro model or the GFS model is going to more accurately predict the path of the next storm that's going to drop snow or rain or any number of things on us. Today, weather forecasts are often based on multiple models, also known as an ensemble forecast. An ensemble forecast blends together a full range of possibilities from many models so that you can look at the worst case scenario, best case scenario, the mean, and look at those models in many different ways. For weather forecasts, you're probably often seeing this in the form of these spaghetti looking lines, with the ensemble being the mean of all those different possible tracks for a storm. In thinking about models this way, it's important to understand that not all models produce the same predictions. Sometimes a model will be highly accurate. Occasionally one model or another might not be very accurate at all. Looking at an ensemble of many well-developed models often increases their usefulness and their accuracy as a whole. This is true for weather, and it is also true for climate change. Global climate models were developed as early as the 1980s to predict weather decades rather than days in advance. Today, there are about 20 good global climate models that were developed with considerable scientific rigor. Each of those 20 models will provide different predictions for the future. No two models are the same. Some details within each model are different. When it comes to global climate models, one of the key factors that makes each one different is emission scenarios. Emission scenarios are key drivers of these models because they predict the rate at which greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide will be released in the future. A common approach among those who analyze climate change is to use many reliable models with many plausible emission scenarios and then blend them together to create an ensemble that looks at the broadest range of future conditions. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't want to be
Okay.
mean, but we are on a really tight schedule because we have to be out of the room and we want to let everybody testify. You can also send us your testimony by email, so I am gonna start cutting people off at 5.
So, all
Sorry.
right, we have
Sorry,
some,
Adam.
we have some very interesting findings from this largest water supply study in the country. We find out about some other stuff.
I'll try to be loud. Once again, I want to thank you, Senator Metzger and Skoufis, for seeking public input on this critical piece of legislation. Ashton Illinois, Chair for Second Orange County, and all volunteer grassroots frontline community organization. As you already know, we've been fighting one of the newest frac gas power plants in New York State, the CCPA Valley project, which was built on bribes and lies, as evidenced by the recent conviction of Joe Percoco, a former Cuomo aide, who was bribed by company executives to facilitate this project. Now, because of our battle with one of the largest sources of pollution and greenhouse gases in the state of New York, we are uniquely impacted by any proposed legislation, climate legislation, and it indeed will determine our fate because climate policy is actually energy policy. And what Joe Percoco was bribed for was more than just ensuring the CPV got a power purchase agreement. It was to quote, and I'm quoting from the indictment, shape New York State's energy policy. Our experience with this egregious conspiracy has taught us an important lesson that the real cause of the climate crisis is corruption. Now, we had the technology to transition away from fossil fuels decades ago. What we didn't have was the political will because it was sold to fossil fuel interests like CPV. So now here we are on the precipice of 10,000 years of irreversible climate chaos, 30 seconds to midnight before we hit a night storm. We can't afford to get this wrong. We can't afford mistakes. It's too late. We're out of time. So now in my February 14th testimony, I explained why I am opposed to the CCPA in its current form, why I like some provisions of the Governor's Climate Leadership Act and some provisions of the OPT Act, but I believe we need much bolder, stronger mandates than any of these current bills provide. We need an unambiguous, measurable, and accountable climate action bill. The CCPA in its current form is riddled with flaws and loopholes. I have a more detailed description, which I'll give James. Jen already has it, by 3 prominent experts, including scientist Tony Graffia from Cornell University. But I'll just give you one example. The CCPA defines greenhouse gas emissions as any source that would enable a state to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which could mean that if the state thought it couldn't tackle a problem, it wouldn't be counted. It also defines greenhouse gas emission source as anything that could be monitored for compliance. The problem is that most greenhouse gas emission sources are not monitored, and emissions are calculated based on estimates, cars, heating sources, etc. Even methane leaking from pipelines is not measured or monitored. So this could mean that none of these sources would be counted. In other words, while the 100% reduction language sounds great, it means nothing if you're so arbitrarily defining what greenhouse gas emission source is and what gets counted. It also, as someone said, starts counting from 1990 levels, and since we've reduced emissions from that time already, the CCPA could actually allow emissions to increase in the short term. It's also important to note that CCPA was written 2 years ago. Since then, 2 large frac gas power plants have come online, one poisoning my children and Cricket Valley and Dover. Together, these 2 plants have just increased the state's greenhouse gas emissions from the entire electric sector by 25%, according to scientists. And Riverkeeper recently cited reports indicating that neither of these plants are needed to close a new point, which was what the original bribery scheme requested. So I would suggest that the first mandate of any climate bill should be to shut down CPV and CVE overnight. You will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the electric sector by 25%. That must be step 1 for New York State. There are other technical flaws in the CCPA. While it calls for 50% renewable energy by 2030, it says nothing about what happens after 2030. And as we electrify all of our energy needs, the electric sector will become a much greater portion of our energy profile. Here, Cuomo's bill that says 100% low-serving entities must be carbon-free by 2040 is actually stronger. The CCPA also raised RGGI and other climate funds for social mandates that really belong, as you noted once before, in a separate bill diminishing investments in renewable. I want to just make one really quick point. One of the most alarming flaws was testified to by a speaker from the New York solar energy industries 2 weeks ago when he said that the prevailing wage provision in CCPA would increase costs of residential solar by 25% and effectively kill solar in New York. This is a provision, by the way, that would not apply to fossil fuel companies, making solar less competitive. So I'm gonna jump over the rest. You can see my February 14th testimony on Protect Orange County's Facebook page. Also, if you guys want to sign a petition asking for oversight hearings on CPV, you can find that on the Action Network. Just put in CPV. But I want to just leave you with one thought. Two thoughts, actually. The most unjust transition is one that never happens. And finally, that hope for our children lies within truth, and truth lies in the crack between climate denial and climate deception. Thank you.
Dale, Tisha, Jessica Goki, and Jay Armour are back.
Getting over cold, so I hope I have an outside voice. My name is Gail Pincha. I live in Rockland County, and I'm here today representing over 50,000 members of Sierra Club's Atlantic chapter as co-chair of the statewide legislative committee. And thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of two legislators who clearly understand the importance and the dangers that we face from climate change, and who realize that what we do in this moment will help determine the fate of the planet. We're already seeing catastrophic damage from increasingly violent storms, which affect the lives of our citizens and the economy of our nation. So I'm going to just briefly mention some of the most important provisions of the Climate Creative Protection Act, and also outline some ways to support those goals in the short term. So CCPA will make New York State a leader on the path to 100% renewable energy while providing good jobs and protection for communities and workers hardest hit by climate change. As a member of a coalition of over 160 community, social justice, labor, faith, and environmental groups, Sierra Club supports CCPA as the most achievable way to lead the state forward in this climate crisis. So most importantly, CCPA codifies into law, which is what's really important, a 100% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, rather than relying on executive actions, which can change with a change in the person who holds the governor's seat. It requires that 50% renewable grid by 2030. It devotes 40% of climate mitigation funding to impacted communities, and it ensures fair labor standards for all energy projects that receive state funding. CCPA includes benchmarks, reporting requirements for major emission sources, stringent enforcement requirements, and a legally binding climate and equity screen for new projects. And that's important. It mandates formation of a climate action council of 25 members appointed by the legislature as well as by the governor. The governor's proposal, just he controls the appointments. CCPA's rules and regulations to reduce all carbon emissions will take time to promulgate, but there are actions the legislature can take in the short term, either inside or outside the budget, to support CCPA's goals in the short term. And an example of that, excuse me, is CCPA's long-term goal of 100% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050 applies across all sectors, while the governor's budget proposal only touches on the electricity sector, the grid. So Sierra Club agrees that when we plug in our electric cars and our heat pumps into the grid, it should be powered by renewable energy. So it is important to switch the grid to truly renewable energy, not to include nuclear. But New York can also codify an interim target to reduce our transportation emissions 50% by 2030. Through promoting electrification of our public transit, installation of 10,000 new charging stations, and incentives for residents and municipalities to buy electric vehicles at affordable prices. And in the short term, the legislature can codify the current goal from the 2015 energy plan to reduce energy consumption in buildings 23% by 2030. Those are some things we can do right now. CCPA's mitigation funding for climate justice communities will give good jobs to local residents, but and benefit New York's economy. It also provides transition funding to train workers from the fossil fuel industry to take the emerging clean energy jobs. But currently, the governor has proposed $70 million in transition funding to impacted communities. We really need to make sure that these funds are reserved for communities in which a fossil fuel plant is permanently closed, permanently retired, not repowered by another form of fossil fuel or non-renewable energy resource. And the amount of money that transition funding needs to be increased to adequately help communities cover transition training and also the taxes that get lost by plant closures. This funding could be instrumental in allowing plants such as CPB and Danskammer to close permanently without increasing the tax burden of the nearby residents. So in closing, I'd like to thank you again for listening to stakeholder testimony about CCPA and looking forward to working with you again on this impressive but achievable legislation. Thank you.
To sum up why we need to make changes on a global scale. We can submit our findings and writings. So I read the 18 pages, and as a lifelong member of the Green Party, I appreciate all green ink. But I don't think it's enough. I think we need another 18 pages attached to these 18 pages. Climate change is often referred to as a death by 1,000 tiny cuts. And I propose what is happening to the integrity of our government representation as death by 1,000 campaign donations. If you go to your town meetings, all of you, we are all in the Mid-Hudson Region's Economic Development Council area, which is 10 counties squashed together by Cuomo's Hunger Game of awards for who can give the power plants the most amount of water so that the city of Middletown can then get a $10 million economic grant, or who can sell non-sustainable development like Amy's Kitchen water. In 2015, they agreed to that. They didn't even know in 2018 of November if they had enough water to sell them. So I'm also here as a member of the Green Party and a member of a grassroots initiative concerned with a variety of issues in the Hudson Valley, primarily those surrounding economic development pressures from outside sources. And that organization is called the Concerned Citizens for the Hudson Valley. We are a group that is reluctantly formed to try to hold our elected and appointed officials accountable for promoting stupid, unnecessary, and harmful ideas under the guise of economic development. I'm forced to remind myself that this is a nonpartisan grassroots group, despite my Green Party designation. And in a way, it's a beautiful thing. At the time we formed, I saw Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Trump supporters all sitting at the same table in the same room, agreeing that we did in fact share common values: clean air, less traffic, clean water, open space, and protection and preservation of our forests, to name a few. We also all had a very high standard of jobs that we wanted to see promoted, since we were in a county that at the time held the lowest unemployment rate in the state, and our state holds, in my understanding, some of the lowest unemployment rates in the county. So a lot of these bad economic development projects, like CPB power plant that Camilla Malik mentioned, are supported by, for example, Sean Patrick Maloney, who came out and gave a press release stating it was a job generator for the whopping 23 jobs that it generated. In addition to the 18 pages of goodness that are in here, the 18 pages that I'd like to see attached to it would take what's there, extrapolate it, and make sure that things are not abused. This proposes changes to environmental laws. It also proposes that we have measures in place to make sure that environmental justice zones are represented. And what I want to make sure is that the same thing that's been happening doesn't continue to happen. So for example, you had a representative of an environmental justice zone called the City of Middletown, and it was the mayor, and his name is Joseph DiStefano. And he actually went out of his way to go in 2012 or 2013 to the town of Wawayanda and say, I have it here, I am here as a spokesperson for a resident for the City of Middletown, and as an elected representative, elected mayor of the city and council, we are all here to voice our support for this project. So this proposal suggests that one of the many things it suggests is that environmental justice zones are represented better and have a clear voice. I want to make sure that clear voice doesn't continue to be fake Democrats like Joseph DiStefano, who pretend to represent environmental justice zones, which are hundreds of feet away from the imaginary line where the smoke and the emissions are supposed to stop. You have the town of Wawayanda with CCPA middle plant, you have Middletown right here, yet there was no opposition for community, what do they call those that are illegal in New York State, where we all get to vote, but it doesn't mean anything? We get to sign something? One of those things. No. Permit referendum, that's it, yeah. So without having a referendum for the town to support that, Joseph went and said he supported it. One more thing I just want to bring up is also about hiring experts real quick. So Joseph DiStefano not only represented the environmental justice zone when he sold them water, when he went in 2013 to say he was for the project, but he also represented the city of Middletown in 2018 when he hired an environmental air testing company called CDM Smith. This was in 2018. In 2017, CDM Smith had to pay the U.S. Treasury $4 million because they were found guilty of fraud and bribery. And this is who tested our air in the city of Middletown to say it was safe for us. So that's another representative, another hiring of experts, something that this nicely worded document suggests will help protect us in the future, but it's not protecting us currently. It hasn't protected us in the past. And I can think of a real live example of why every single sentence here needs 4 more sentences attached to it to make sure that the use of experts doesn't continue to happen. So, thank you. I'll email you something. This was, I don't know if you could read half the stuff that's in here.
So, thank you, Senator Metzger and Senator Skoufis, for giving me this opportunity to speak. My name is Jay Armour. My wife and I own Four Winds Farm in Guardian. Looking at CCPA, Bill highlights ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as a way of addressing and mitigating the effects of climate change. I feel that we are at a point where simply reducing the use of fossil fuels is not enough to avoid climate disaster. That we also need to focus on removing carbon dioxide from the air. One very effective and inexpensive way is through agriculture, specifically no-till agriculture. No-till farming keeps the carbon in the soil, and over time, the amount of carbon will increase. High carbon soils not only keep carbon out of the atmosphere, there are a number of benefits to not tilling, like improving soil health, reducing disease pressure, and reducing tractor use. One interesting benefit is that high carbon or high organic matter soils are able to hold more water than low organic matter soils. Most farmland has like 1 to 2% soil organic matter. If it were to rain more than 1.5 inches, you would see water running out of these fields, causing erosion and potentially flooding flood-prone communities. We developed a no-till approach on our farm a number of years ago and have at least 8% soil organic matter soils. In terms of rainfall, our high organic matter soils will absorb a 6-inch rainfall. One of the things climate scientists have predicted for the northeastern U.S. in terms of a change of climate is that we will see an increase in intense rain events. So taking action now to protect our flood-prone communities like New Paltz makes a lot of sense. I understand that there is a bill S-9053 that addresses the establishment of a Columbia Dutchess County's carbon farming pilot project to study the carbon sequestration potential of a range of farming practices. This is certainly a good start and will provide valuable insight into how to encourage till-based farmers to stop tilling. But I believe we need to see a program implemented throughout New York State that encourages and rewards farmers who increase their percent of soil organic matter. Coupled with such a program for farmers should be a program that educates consumers about the benefits of no-till agriculture. Once consumers understand that there are farmers that are working to reduce the impact of global warming through their farming practices, then those consumers will search out and support farmers who incorporate such practices and will encourage farmers to transition to a no-till model. I feel that some aspect of these ideas should be included in the dialogue regarding the Climate Communities Protection Act.
Thank you so much.
And then Jessica Irish. Hi, I'm Iris Marie Bloom, and we are in the room in New Paltz, which is one of the towns that took such a strong leading role in stopping the proposed oil pipeline. We're the leaders of that struggle as well, on the local level, on the state level. And I want to just also congratulate everyone in the room who worked on that. If I took time to name names, it would take a long time. So we have had these specific victories, but we have to stop having all of our time as grassroots activists taken up fighting project by project and town by town. We have better things to do. So we need all the help we can get with the Climate and Community Protection Act. We have a good tool. However, we need to go farther and faster. I do agree with the critique of Anthony Raffia and the other two scientists who have pointed out some of the very important flaws, in particular, setting emissions at a 1990 level. That can't happen. We can't have emissions going up. We've known for 30 years we can't have emissions going up. We are so far behind that we have to stop. We have to drop emissions starting immediately, radically drop emissions. We need to prevent all new fossil fuel infrastructure from being built. That includes pipelines, that includes power plants, that includes small-scale power plants and large-scale frac gas power plants. I was in a room yesterday in White Plains, in the county of Westchester, where I saw what's happening. That when Con Edison, the downstate utility, has issued a moratorium on new frac gas hookups, they have created a situation where all the executives of Con Ed are lined up with the power brokers in the real estate and building and construction industries. They are standing shoulder to shoulder saying we have to approve new frac gas pipelines. And when we talk about the solutions that have been proposed, air source heat pumps, insulation, ground source heat pumps, renewables, we have this technology. Everyone in that room was of one accord saying, oh, well, we tried that. Like they proposed it in 2017 on a very small scale, and then they're saying it's not enough. So we need significant funding from the state to partner with Con Ed, Central Hudson, with the utilities that are engaging with customers on a small scale, offering small scale grants to buy air source heat pumps or to do insulation, to do the right thing, to invest in renewables. We need to scale that up fast and furious.
I'm not as much a policy head as either of you, so I'm leaving it to you to figure out how to do that. But clearly, it does have to be done. I want to also just talk for a minute about the reality of climate change. When I think of climate change, I think of the 5 funerals that my cousin went to on Staten Island from people who drowned horribly. I think of the woman in the Philippines. Of course, there were so many like her, but just one person who her family goes to the top floor of their 1-story house and waits and waits for help, and then is carried away by the flood. And when the flood came, she's holding her mother, she's holding her daughter, and she's holding her other daughter in the water, grabbing onto a floating refrigerator. And she had to let go of her mother. She had to let go of her other daughter was ripped away from her. And she was the only one left. So I feel this is what's happening. People are being ripped away from us right now. We are the ones left who can still take action. So the one more thing I want to mention as I come to a close is that it would be great to have some drawdown aspect in this bill. And one practical thing, will sound strange if you're not familiar with it, is that when you feed cows seaweed, their methane production drops by 90%. 90%. Small amount of seaweed. So possibly New York State could be the first to actually implement that type of drawdown. So supply, demand, drawdown, we need these solutions on all levels. Thank you so much, Senator Metzger and Senator Skoufis, for your leadership.
I'm Dan Gunter, also a farmer and a member of the Climate Action Coalition. And Ann and I have been climate involved for over 20 years, and we've been climate activists for most of it. And we've gotten to the point where we're somewhat morose, another word for depressed. Livid, angry, and in part because we've come to this point since James Hansen blew the whistle, if you will. We have added more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than all other centuries before. And we not only have not reined in, slowed down, or capped our emissions. Last year was the highest amount of emissions ever in history. But the other part of our frustration is that for the most part, we're not feeling that there's an appropriate response. So I just want to thank you too sincerely today for doing this. And I have 2 really upbeat tips for you. This is The Way the World Ends, and The Uninhabitable Earth, which just came out last week. And the inscription is on a separate piece of paper, so you can each read it, switch inscriptions, and pass it on. It occurred to me that maybe I shouldn't give gifts to senators, and then I said, well, we can call them Exhibit A and B. Thank you very much, and I'm sure everybody in this room really appreciates it. So this is from everybody. Woo! A few years ago, I guess I'm still obsessed with the idea of can we feed ourselves when food stops coming to New York State. And it will stop coming to New York State. Most people don't know, at least at that time, I was conscious of the fact that we only provide 20% or less of the food that we eat from in the state. That means that 80% is important. It's a shock, maybe to many of you. And so when we talk about food security or food scarcity, we're in sort of this weird bind because we have such an abundance of food, most of us. Let's not forget the people who don't have an abundance, but most of us have an abundance. And yet I don't feel we have at the same time food security. So of the reason is that the climate is going crazy. Now, these are dated. This was 2014, but it shows that a good portion of the country is under severe drought. Obviously, California. And we're getting into the grain belt. Two interesting statistics. One is for every 1 degree rise in Celsius, we lose 10% of the planet's food. So, and maybe in that time, we gained 10% more population. So we're talking about a conundrum. This was the same year, and it looked like they were trying to come up with different names for drought. From moderate drought to severe drought to exceptional drought. All of California, where this nation gets 50% of its fruits, nuts, and vegetables, was in real scary time in 2014. And I think this is the ultimate where we're heading. And we personally, New York State gets 30% as opposed to 50% of its fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And that is, I guess, because we're on the coast and have an easier time importing from other countries. So, in light of my concerns, we took on an intern from SUNY to map in Ulster County, which I think is somewhat typical of most of the counties in the state, to map the prime soils. And I had her do 1 and 2, and she ended up coming up with something that was so depressing. I said, well, why don't we do 1, 2, and 3? And so it ended up still being somewhat depressing. But the concern that I have now is not just that we have such limited class 1, 2, and 3 soil, is that they're all along our rivers. And there will come a time that those rivers are not only going to flood crops several times during the season, but also wash out our cropland. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Jess Couch. Thank you for having us come to speak. I am a resident of Ulster County and previously Sullivan County, and I speak to my experience in both places. The term climate change is no longer an abstraction, a future model, or a theory to debate. As many have testified already, we know that our climate has changed. #climate change. As many others have commented, Senate Bill S5908A, known as the New York Fossil Fuels Act, offers a much more stringent timeline and action goals designed to specifically pivot away from the continued acceptance of fossil fuels, specifically fracked gas. It is critical to specify the problem of so-called natural gas, because it is not a bridge fuel. It is a potent greenhouse gas comprised mostly of methane. Methane is 86 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. More heat is more global warming, is our climate changed. The word methane and natural gas are each only mentioned once in the 16-page CCPA document. To put forth a bill on climate change that is both urgent and actionable, it must be specific and clear. It must identify the immediate and increasing threat within New York State, which is now impacting not only our climate, but our air and water. The data on greenhouse gas consumption clearly shows fracked gas as the major issue of energy consumption. New York State's overbuild of pipelines, compressor stations, metering stations, and power plants that benefit a profit margin of the natural gas industry is the main energy problem, and it must be called out. I've brought several visualizations that underscore the drastic need to immediately halt this overbuild. So this first one is a map of all the compressor stations ranging in horsepower between 1,000 and 40,000, dating back to 2016. Since 2016, there have been several more compressor stations and or upgrades, two of which were in my previous county, in Sullivan County. That said, the aggregate horsepower for just one midstream, medium-sized infrastructure site is around 438,000. So what does this mean to us? Like, how can we really understand that? So we looked at the amount of carbon dioxide emitted from one of these, a mid-size, and each one releases more than 100,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So looking up EPA data, we can imagine each compressor station is the equivalent of 22,000 cars, new cars, cited. So we're talking about miniature cities, right? With each one of these, many of them are sort of hidden away in forests that have been raised. So instead of absorbing carbon dioxide, we're now adding to the problem. This last visualization shows just the rate that even as we understand that this is a problem, time-wise, more things are being built. It is not going down, even as we understand this problem. It is actually increasing. And that is because of the incredible financial pressure that is market-based, but it is not energy-based. It is not meeting the needs of citizens. So at present, the CCPA bill does not offer legislators, regulators, scientists, or the public sufficient tools to curtail this runaway infrastructure. It is not enough to monitor and report the damage as it is built. We must take bold action to halt it, to invest in clean renewable energy systems. And I believe the New York Off Fossil Fuels Act does exactly that and should be our model, given the mounting prices we now face now that our climate has changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kathy Nolan, then Michelle Lindsay, and then Wendy.
Thank you. The offer testimony in support of New York State's proposed climate and community protection. I serve as legislator in Ulster County for District 22, representing Olive, Shandaken, Benning, and Hardenburg, 4 towns in the rural part of western Ulster County. I'm also a physician and serve as Senior Research Director for Catskill Mountain Keeper. Woo-hoo! Thank you. An organization that protects and promotes our region's wildlands and natural resources. Catskill Mountain Keeper is a member of the steering committee for New York Renews, a coalition that advocates for passage of the Climate and Community Protection Act. Ulster County, under the pioneering direction of Mike Hine, our first county executive, and with strong bipartisan support from the Ulster County legislature, has been a leader in New York State and across the country in efforts to address our current climate crisis and transition to a clean and renewable energy future. Ulster County's Greener by Design initiative combines a commitment to energy conservation, efficiency, and renewable energy generation with pragmatic interim solutions, such as purchasing 100% of our direct and indirect renewable energy to offset our indirect and direct carbon emissions. This has resulted in Ulster County becoming the nation's, we think, first carbon neutral county government. We are rapidly transitioning our county-owned vehicles to a hybrid and all-electric fleet and have switched all of our buses and our rural transit system to biodiesel. Not only have we received state, national, and international recognition for our commitment to environmental stewardship, but we've also served as a model for how to grow economically and improve our quality of life while making this transition. Recognizing that the climate crisis has already become urgent, with jobs, homes, and the quality of our water severely impacted by more frequent, more intense, and on some occasions dangerously powerful storms and rainfall, Governor Cuomo and the New York State Legislature have begun to take action to encourage energy improvements and help communities become more sustainable and resilient. Immediate statewide, national, global action is essential since everyone contributes either to increasing emissions or to decreasing emissions and stabilizing our climate. Unfortunately, we do not yet have in place all the tools we need to ground and organize this work. The Climate and Community Protection Act plugs these gaps and starts the work of making sure that our transition to a carbon-free future aids rather than injures workers in disadvantaged communities. Cutting greenhouse gases by 100% by 2050 or 2030 requires placing emissions caps on buildings, industry, commercial businesses, agriculture, and transportation, all these sectors. This is a drastic overhaul that is required. Done properly, in collaboration with workers, unions, farmers, teachers, schools, parents, churches, and communities with special concerns, our transition to a carbon-free future can create new and better jobs while protecting air and water quality, and therefore our own health and the health of the fragile web of nature on which our lives and communities depend. Many of the wonderful things we have done voluntarily in Ulster County are mandated by the CCPA. These forward-looking actions, including measures to increase energy efficiency and the transition to electric-powered vehicles, have provided savings in costs and other benefits to us here in Ulster County, as well as protecting the environment. They also serve to protect our vulnerable communities, as the citizens of the town of Ulster and city of Kingston did recently when they demanded revisions for proposed battery storage and fossil fuel generation project that is now redesigned as a battery-only project.
Yeah.
That's the way to a more stable electric grid and helps us transition to renewable energy. Because the CCPA builds in processes for ongoing deliberation and innovation, all the solutions it will generate are not yet specified. It does, however, specify that we must have solutions. That is indeed its most important message, and I urge you to pass this in the Senate, and I assume that we will have the assistance in the Assembly and get this to Governor Cuomo for his signature. Thank you very much.
Michelle Lindsay from the Town of Tuxedo Town Board member. And I thank you, Senators Metzger and Skoufis, for giving us this opportunity to champion CCPA. I fully support its goals. It's the time to act and not to delay any further. We should be prepared to spend the funds necessary for prevention of disasters and climate change, so we are not continually burdened by exorbitant costs of recovery. As I say, I served on the town board in Tuxedo. Recently, Tuxedo adopted the Climate Smart Community Pledge. As we work towards certification, we need to rely on volunteers to collect data. I am delighted that our students in Tuxedo's STEM program will be enthusiastic volunteers in this effort as we create a benchmark for an energy audit. But beyond data collection, Tuxedo and all municipalities in New York seeking to become climate smart communities will need to find funds to match the funds we can get from very good, generous grant programs that are available. Tuxedo plans to install LED streetlights, electric vehicle charging stations, solar roofs on municipal buildings, and other climate smart actions. Municipalities will need help to afford these projects. As you work on CCPA, I encourage the legislature to fully restore AIM funding directly to towns and other municipalities, so we can have some funds to be able to do these projects. While Tuxedo is lucky to have dedicated volunteers, somehow municipalities will need funding to meet the benchmarking required every 4 or 5 years and the goals of CCPA. We may need to consider some things that may not be so popular, but allowing municipalities to exempt, at least in part, the cost of climate smart projects from the tax cap. Somehow Tuxedo will find funds to complete our climate smart projects. Finally, we would like to learn as we start this project,
will all the steps we take to achieve certification be compatible with the requirements of the new CCPA? That would be helpful for us to know as we get started. Another hat I wear is chair of the Conservation and National Affairs and Legislation Committee for the Garden Club of Orange and Dutchess Counties. We are a member of the Garden Club of America, an 18,000 member organization that promotes responsibility for environmental stewardship. Just this week, 300 of us met with senators and representatives in Washington to advocate for immediate climate action. Garden Club of America supports international, federal, state, and local greenhouse gas reduction legislation and regulations that reflect the social cost of carbon and have their basis in peer-reviewed science. We support initiatives to support sustainable forest and wilderness areas as these open lands sequester carbon, help ensure clean air, and protect watersheds. We support accelerated promotion of renewable energy and advanced battery storage, as well as the promotion of energy efficiency measures in the building and transportation sectors. Garden Club of America opposes EPA plans to repeal the Clean Power Plan, which requires power plants to reduce carbon emissions. We oppose the EPA proposal to remove targets for improved gas mileage for cars and trucks, the corporate average fuel economy. This rollback increases carbon dioxide emissions by 870 million tons and will cost consumers over $130 billion in added fuel expenses. So we encourage New York to support fuel efficiency measures. Also, finally, GCA opposes offshore drilling in order to protect our oceans. Thank you.
My name is Wendy Metzger. I'm here to thank you both for taking climate change seriously, but to tell you that New York State needs to implement 100% renewable energy by 2030, as outlined by the Fossil Fuels Bill, not 2050 as proposed by CCPA. The science is clear. The world climate is approaching a tipping point far more rapidly than expected. The feasibility is clear. Studies, noticeably the James study by a group of professors from Stanford and Cornell, I can give you guys a copy, detail how speedier conversion to clean energy, specifically in New York, is not just possible, but cost-effective and job-creating. So the question is, why wait? There are two major answers to this question: corporate economics and human will. I have to admit, I'm a frustrated and confused homeowner. I'm lucky enough to own 2 houses in New York, a year-round home in Chester and a vacation house in the Adirondack Park. Tax-wise, it would be a lot cheaper for me to sell them and move south. But until recently, I valued the many benefits of living in New York State, particularly clean air and water. Here's why I've become confused. When I'm in Chester, I devote some time to fighting the environmentally hazardous CCPA fracked gas power plant, a plant that has received very generous tax breaks from Orange County Industrial Development Agency. Then, when I'm in upstate in the Adirondacks, I read in the local papers about yet another wind farm that was denied a permit because the energy it creates will overload the grid. Infrastructure to transport the energy downstate. As a double property taxpayer in New York State, I am unhappy with how my money is being spent. New York State is supporting the construction of a network of plants and pipelines for fracked gas. The plants are well known to pollute the environment with particulate matter. Pipelines are well known to pollute it with methane leaks. These and other dangers of transporting and using fracked gas are well documented in the book Probably by Winona Howder, founder of Freedom Water Watch. Meanwhile, a lack of clean grid infrastructure is limiting the construction of green energy sources. I'm a writer, not a mathematician, but the economics here seem straightforward. Eliminate state and local tax breaks, economic incentives, pilot programs, and the like for fossil fuel plants and infrastructure. Insist those economic advantages be redirected to the construction of clean, green energy infrastructure and plants. Create heavy tax penalties for the use of carbon fuel. set up a phasing out and closing date for all fossil fuel and nuclear plants and infrastructure, shut down all natural gas pipelines, incentivize green energy companies, de-incentivize fossil fuel and pollutant spewing companies, create and enact the legislation to do this, and enforce it. A good example of the state's lack of will is the competitive Power Ventures frack gas plant in Way near me. In spite of the fact that Governor Cuomo's close aide, Joseph Prococo, was convicted of taking bribes from CCPA and committing fraud on CCPA's behalf, during its permitting and construction process, the plant is running. In spite of having its air permit denied, the plant is running. Despite having its water permit denied by the DEC, the plant is running. The plant is running because New York State has lacked the political will to effectively shut down CCPA or effectively battle CCP and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in court. CPB's will to profit has been stronger than New York State's will to have a clean environment. It really is that simple. Thank you. And this lack of will sends a strong message to other fossil fuel companies. If CPB can get away with all this in New York State, so can we. Conversely, if the CPB plant and others like it are shut down, if there's a statewide ban on the construction of fossil fuel plants and infrastructure, and if there's construction of green infrastructure, the message will be heard across the land. The way for energy companies to make money in New York is with green sources. However, at the end of the day, and that day is getting shorter, we are not in a fight about the environment. This is a fight to save the environment. We're in a fight about money and will. I remember when you had to drive all over the place to try to buy an organic carrot. It was usually ugly and oversized and didn't taste all that good. Now look at supermarkets all over the state have organic food aisles because we the people voted with our pocketbooks.
Right.
How much more time do I have? 30 seconds, okay. You, Senators Skoufis and Metzger, are now we the people acting on our behalf. It's great to see you two working together, and I know you have what it takes. Please write or sign a bill that will vote with our pocketbook to convert New York State to 100% green energy by 2030. Please take on fossil fuel industry in the courts and the media and in aggressive legislation and enforcement. With the Democratic Assembly and Senate, New York State has a golden opportunity to show the way for other states by enacting a strict and swift changeover to 100% green grid. He writes. Push through the legislation that will make New York State the national leader in clean air, clean water, and clean energy by 2030.
Yay! Crystal Ford, Eric Wood. I'm running out to lose my electric car, so Kyle's going to play the role of basketball. They need to come up? Okay, so next person. So Crystal, all right, you're up.
All right, thank you for having me today and holding this really important hearing. I'm Crystal Ford. I'm the president of the Garrison Union Free School PTA, so that's Parent Teacher Association. I should be worrying about science fairs and bake sales, whatever else PTAs do, but I'm here because climate change is arguably the most important threat to our children's future. Okay, so our PTA just voted to endorse two policies that address climate change. One is at the federal level. We endorse the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act, which puts a price on carbon and returns that money to all households equally on a monthly basis. Then we also voted to endorse the CCPA. It's incredibly important that we really aggressively tackle our emissions, that we transition to renewable energy, but we also do it in a way that's fair, that we create green jobs, good paying jobs, that we are bringing along the communities that have been left behind, where energy extraction, storage, burning is all facing the communities that can't fight it, and our children's health is affected by this. We cannot allow that to happen anymore. So it's really important. I love that the CCPA is taking on the fact of justice and jobs, because we can't just, we can't leave that behind in our mission to tackle one of the most important issues. Okay, so this is about our children and our livable future. So that's all I
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Wood. I work with NIPERT, the New York Public Interest Research Group here in the Hudson Valley. Just want to thank both of you for letting us all speak today and weighing in on the Climate Community Protection Act. Ultimately, it's great to see things rolling on the state and federal level finally, about 40 years too late, but better late than never. And we do, think that the Climate Community Protection Act is good, but it needs to be much, much stronger. It needs to put New York on the strongest path necessary to climate change. And in order to do that, NIPERT recommends the following. The timeline for the goals that are presented in this legislation needs to be accelerated. New York must strive to achieve 100% renewable energy and net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. So in doing this, a timeline, a roadmap, if you will, should be available to the public of how we are going to achieve that as well. We've heard these lofty goals, said over and over again, but we're not really seeing how this is going to be possible. And also, when we're thinking about this, we need to phase out nuclear and biomass because they need to be excluded from the definition of renewable energy systems. These energy sources are not environmentally or financially sustainable. And additionally, nuclear energy is a significant threat to public safety, especially as New York's existing plants age out. Plans should also be made to phase out our existing nuclear biomass. But we also need to put an immediate moratorium on all fossil fuel infrastructure and storage. There are currently several proposals to build out fossil fuel infrastructure in New York, from Buffalo to Long Island, and these proposals come in the form of storage units, pipelines, power plants. And here in the Hudson Valley, as many people have already mentioned, we see CPV, Cricket Valley, the proposed dance scammer expansion here. These projects need to be shut down, brought back to the drawing board, and resubmitted with plans that are in line with our state's proposed energy goals that include renewable energy and battery storage, like we're seeing in the glide path here in the town of Ulster. According to the DEC, the Hudson River could rise another 27 inches by mid-century. Methane and carbon dioxide emissions are the primary drivers of climate change, which is leading to sea level rise of the Hudson River and posing these risks. Ironically, adding another natural gas power plant close to the Hudson is going to make it more likely that the plant is going to be flooded and contributes to a return to dance scammer. Another point I want to make is the U.S. Energy Information Administration website shows that New York's electricity is generated 37% natural gas, 33% nuclear, 23% hydro, less than 5% of non-hydro renewable sources. And without a clear definition of what carbon neutral or carbon free is, we're already at 98%. If these things aren't defined at what this is, at carbon neutral energy. We're referring to, I guess, Cuomo's Green New Deal as well. So we know that New York's aging fleet of nuclear reactors will most likely not be licensed to operate past 2040, and there's no plans to develop new nuclear facilities, as I mentioned, is a good thing because they're dangerous and pose a threat to public safety. So this ultimately means that, under this, New York's ultimately going to increase the amount of greenhouse gases that we're contributing to climate change and expand fossil fuel infrastructure in the form of natural gas. So my next point, getting away from the fossil fuel stuff quick and strengthening CCPA, or the electricity point rather, we need to make sure that all displaced fossil fuel nuclear workers are given preference for new green jobs. The CCPA has excellent standards to ensure workers are paid prevailing wages, have apprenticeship programs, safety policies, and more. But this needs to be taken a step further to ensure that green energy companies are given hiring preferences to displace workers from the fossil fuel and nuclear sectors. We also need to set targets set forth for the transportation and building sectors. A significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions are generated in the transportation sector, which have a huge impact on public health, especially in traffic-dense communities. Yeah, so reporting on compliance and monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions should be readily available for the public. CCPA requires various reports. However, it is critical to ensure the public is provided with an easily understandable scorecard with updates for all sectors by region. Public understanding of compliance will add a layer of accountability and oversight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We have Stephen Metz, Amanda Jo Green, and Aaron Walton. Thank you. Stephen first. Is Stephen here? Okay, good.
Your New York State Senators, James Metzger and Skoufis, thank you for your time today. And your advocacy for the CCPA bill. My name is Stephen Metz, and I'm a resident in Senator Metzger's district. I'm a geographer and a planner by training and as director of GS Technologies. In recent years, I have employed spatial technologies around the proliferation of what is known as midstream gas infrastructure, locations along mainline pipes after the frac well before pipelines downstream of city gates. This past month, Oil Change International published a new brief entitled Drilling Towards Disasters, Why U.S. Oil and Gas Expansion is Incompatible with Climate Limits. Its focus is upstream drilling, but its conclusions have profound impacts for New York State's midstream geographies. As seen in this chart graphic here, this is the Appalachian Basin. We're just on the east of the Appalachian Basin. This is a glut industry zone that is determined to get to market by any means necessary frac gas. Within this decade, any means necessary is the rapid expansion of 40+ frac gas compressor stations in New York State. And as seen in this third map graphic in summary, here's the actual land use of these stations. And here's a chart actually that shows the particular use. It's crop and farmland and forested land. These are our locations, our rural communities. The incompatibility of these facilities is fracturing and devastating local communities. I raise these issues, the rapidity of the infrastructure deployment, its incompatibility, its toxic toll on rural locations, because they typify the new sacrifice zones of New York State. Importantly, these geographies feature prominently in both senators' districts. In order to protect these geographies, the CCPA bill should be revised in the following two areas. First, while the CCPA bill addresses environmental justice broadly, its concentration is on top-heavy bureaucratic structure. Even while there is seemingly parity between upstate and downstate geographies, New York's new sacrifice zones remain undefined and uncertain. Second, CCPA's deep investment in the data inventory for existing emissions is a critical asset of the bill. In the right hands, it has significant potential, but the over-reliance on the New York State DEC to develop, house, and update the databases is problematic. Let's not forget, it's New York State DEC's own stale data and guidance that essentially disappeared thousands of individuals and households close to the proximity of the CBP site. A full investigation is called for by Protect Orange County is absolutely warranted and necessary. To this point, the bill should not encourage doubling down on an agency that has failed consistently in the face of frac gas infrastructure in states' multiple communities, now sacrifice zones. The CPA bill can deliver a much-needed data product and effectively address intensifying inequities in New York's energy sector. But the bill needs an honest reckoning of its own structures to be able to answer affirmatively, yes, this bill will immediately halt the proliferation of sacrifice zones.
Good afternoon. It's not going to that. Okay. I'm Amanda Jo Green. I am the environmental director for Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, and I moonlight as an Ulster County legislator from the district of Rosendale and part of Marlborough. And in that capacity, I chair the Energy and Environment Committee and the Climate Smart Committee. One of the things that the Climate Smart Committee did just this week was convene a forum on refrigerant management, a very unacknowledged either climate solution or serious climate problem, because when CFCs were, Freon was banned, the HFCs that replace them are 1,000 to 2,000 times, have 1,000 to 2,000 times higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. And also, I want us to stop using the term natural gas. It's not natural, it's fracked gas, and we should call it what it is, which is methane. We have propane and we have methane, and let's change our language to acknowledge that. I want to mention the carbon cycle, because I think this is very relevant to CCPA. We tend to focus on emissions prevention or reduction, which is very important, but we also have to, as several speakers have said, focus on those ecosystem services that draw down, sequester, and safely store carbon and other greenhouse gases. And in that regard, I'd like to publicly support Assemblywoman Dee Dee Barrett's carbon farming proposal that is especially relevant to this area. When I met with Senator Skoufis and when I met with Congressman Delgado, they both expressed skepticism that we could reach 100% renewable energy with storage and efficiency by 2030. And our challenge is to create the roadmap to get there. So please fund and create a multi-stakeholder process that looks at energy planning on a local and regional level. And that should be required exercise for all CCAs, for all community choice aggregation. It shouldn't just be about lowering your price. It should be about solving an urgent and imminent problem. I want to say that our state energy plan does not do that. Our state energy plan lists methane, so-called natural or unnatural frack gas, as a bridge fuel because it burns more cleanly at the site, but not across its life cycle because of fugitive methane. And then I would also like to offer Clearwater's help. I'm taking off my legislative hat and putting on my Clearwater hat. Clearwater has created a community-based environmental justice inventory for the city of Peekskill. That's up on our website. We did that a few years ago. We're one of the few, if only, maybe the only environmental justice group between New York and Albany. And then we worked with 4 cities, Kingston, Poughkeepsie, Beacon, and Peekskill, to do a climate justice inventory. And so I would like to offer that we would be willing to serve on the New York Climate Action Council, the Environmental Justice or Climate Justice working groups, because we have direct experience. And finally, I would like to say that nuclear is not clean energy. It is not a climate solution. Clearwater is challenging the Public Service Commission's $7.6 billion nuclear subsidy, and just moving forward. It's not mentioned in CCA, but let's be really clear that nuclear is not clean energy. Ask the people in Peekskill and Buchanan what they think about the 1,700 tons of material of high-level nuclear waste that is their legacy. And I'm going to provide you both with this little poster on climate solutions. When we talk about this crisis, people can get very upset, depressed, and disempowered. But if we start implementing some of the climate solutions we've heard here today, they get very inspired and very hopeful. I have a few copies that I'll leave on the desk, and if anyone wants to get a PDF of it, manajo@aol.com or clearwater.org.
Woo! Good afternoon. My name is Eric Weltman, and I'm a Brooklyn-based senior organizer with Food and Water Watch. Like Iris, I'm thrilled to be in a room full of so many amazing activists and allies. You see friends from Citizen Action and Catskill Mountain Keeper and Mothers Out Front and Clearwater. This really is a room of movers and shakers, including, of course, folks at the table. Thank you, Senator Metzger and Senator Skoufis, for holding this hearing and allowing us the opportunity to testify. New York banned fracking. It was a bold move to protect our health, communities, and environment in defiance of the fossil fuel industry. Unfortunately, we are still suffering from an onslaught of fossil fuel projects, pipelines, and power plants that transport and burn fracked gas. These include the notorious CPB plant, which is built on bribes, and the AIM pipeline, which runs dangerously close to the Indian Point nuclear plant. But we're facing others, including the Williams Pipeline in New York City, a gas-fired microgrid in Albany to power the capital, and of course, the Dan Scammer frack gas plant in Newburgh. These plants would maintain our reliance on fossil fuels, worsening climate change while endangering our families, our communities, and environment. It is absolutely crucial that we enact policies that move New York off fossil fuels. This includes making a fair and just and rapid transition to 100% renewable energy, and includes stopping all new fossil fuel projects. On that note, Food and Water Watch fully acknowledges that there is a lot to love in the Climate and Communities Protection Act. This includes its prioritization of environmental justice and the strong labor provisions. That said, we maintain, and the science is abundantly clear on this point, abundantly clear that the timeline in the CPA for making the transition to renewable energy isn't fast enough. Food and Water Watch is calling for a transition to 100% renewable energy by 2030. Such an ambitious goal is certainly challenging, but it's feasible and it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary. And New York must lead the way. My little visual aid here. We also maintain that climate change legislation must embrace a ban on new fossil fuel projects. As the saying goes, if you find yourself trapped in a hole, the first step is to stop digging. If we don't block projects like Dan Scammer from moving forward, we are dooming ourselves to climate catastrophe. So, visual aid number 2. So, in close, we appreciate your leadership in helping move New York off fossil fuels. Thank you for your consideration.
John Wackman, and Elizabeth Daly. Is Holly here? Okay, John. Is John Wackman here? Yes, that's where it is. Okay. Perfect timing. So you have 5 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Hello, Senators Metzger and Skoufis. At this hearing,
Thank you for holding it, and thank you for attending. My name is John Wackman. I am the coordinator, communicator, and leader for Repair Cafes in the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. It is an all-volunteer project organized by individual communities. In these comments, I wish to speak to the significance of the repair movement in our region and how it relates to climate and community. Repair is a humble act born of necessity, which expresses resistance to the unmaking of our world and our environment. In March, there will be 10 repair cafes in 6 counties in the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. 25 towns in our region now have ongoing repair cafes. By this summer, that number will be 30. And at opposite ends of the states, Long Island and Buffalo are also holding repair cafes this month. The repair cafe idea was started in the Netherlands in 2009, and the idea is simple. A repair cafe is a free community meeting place to bring a beloved but broken item to be repaired by an expert who is also your neighbor. The guys and gals who do the repairs have significant skills. It is not a drop-off service. When you bring your item, you stay with it, watch, help, and learn. The level of gratification is very high on both sides of the table. A lot of stuff gets fixed, and people leave very happy. Our core repair categories are mechanical, electrical, electronic, digital, clothing and textiles, jewelry and ceramics, things made of wood, bicycles and blade sharpening, plus a host of other categories. Repair culture is about these things: extending the life of stuff you care about or that you rely on, feeding your curiosity about the way things work, using tools in your hands, honoring, preserving, and passing on repair know-how, sharing skills, reducing waste, making friends. They take place in churches, libraries, town halls, and community centers. Librarians have become champions of repair cafes. This is intergenerational, hands-on learning. Each repair cafe is locally organized. The range of organizers and partners involved is remarkable. The Repair Cafe here in New Paltz was started by the Climate Action Coalition, which meets every week in this room, the Town of New Paltz Recycling and Reuse Center, and the New Paltz United Methodist Church. Here's a rapid fire listing of some other organizations of organizers in our region: town boards, climate smart task forces, conservation advisory councils, county legislators, Kingston Transition, Woodstock Transition, Sustainable Warwick, Sustainable Saratoga, Green Austin, bicycle advocacy groups, the Rockland County Solid Waste Management Authority, the Beacon Housing Authority, the Mid-Hudson Library System, and the Hudson Division of the American Radio Relay League, because they know electronics. Repair cafes are good at extending the useful life of everyday items. Rough numbers show that over the past 5 years in the Hudson Valley, we have saved well over 4,000 items from the landfill. William McDonough, co-author of the influential book Cradle to Cradle, says, the value of Repair Cafe is that people are going back into a relationship with the material things around them. But as impressive as the growth of the repair movement has been in the US and internationally, no number of laptops and lamps diverted from the waste system will ever make a difference on the scale needed to draw down the carbon in our oceans and atmosphere. So if that is not the goal, what is it? We think that it is the signal that is received by people who walk into a repair cafe in their town. That signal says we are better off when we see our own community in the midst of cooperation, creativity, and downright decency, where goals are achieved and positive outcomes are realized. Okay, repair cafes offer a place for public education, one specific. Both Ulster and Dutchess counties have passed Bring Your Own Bag Acts, which present a daunting public education challenge. This spring, our repair cafes will be an active part of that education effort to help people understand why we are doing this and why it is important. We want to see more than 200 repair cafes in New York State. We believe the result will be changes in mindset and behavior and a new level of resilience.
Okay, yeah, Lou Daly, are you here?
Thank you, Senators Metzger and Skoufis, for the opportunity to testify today in support of the Climate and Community Protection Act. And thanks to all of you for the many amazing testimonies we've heard today. It's great to be in policy. My name is Lou Daly, and I'm a senior policy analyst focusing on just and equitable climate policy at DEMOS, a public policy organization based in New York City and active member of the New Yorker News Coalition. Today, I welcome the opportunity to speak with you about employment gains and other economic benefits from implementation of the CCPA. Despite the urgent need for rapid greenhouse gas reductions and a comprehensive renewable energy transition, it is important to consider the potential economic effects of this transition. The fossil fuel industry and its advocacy allies are spending tens of millions of dollars annually to exploit economic concerns. A familiar refrain in this reckless information campaign is that climate policy is just another form of liberal job-killing regulation. But nothing, in fact, could be further from the truth. A combination of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean transportation investments, if fully scaled to achieve the CCPA's emissions and renewable energy targets, promises significant employment and income gains for New Yorkers. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts estimate that CCPA investments will support more than 200,000 jobs per year on average over a decade. That includes induced jobs, meaning jobs created by the added purchasing power of new clean energy workers. And what that means, it adds up to is 2.1 million years of employment for New Yorkers over the decade. These jobs in turn will generate nearly $140 billion in income for the new clean energy workers for that 10-year period. Also important, workers without a four-year college degree hold approximately 55% of jobs in renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors. And these are typically good-paying jobs in a variety of occupations, including construction, mass transit, and electrical work. Thus, a majority of new employment generated by CCPA investments will benefit working-class residents as defined by education. Perhaps most importantly, the CCPA's requirement that 40% of public investment under this bill must be allocated for low-income communities and environmentally vulnerable low-income communities in particular. What this means is that New York State's renewable energy transition will create lots of jobs where jobs are needed most. Finally, the CCPA's strong labor standards will help to ensure that the clean energy workers who will carry out the transition and help to protect our communities from further climate harm will also be able to thrive themselves in their work and daily lives. The CCPA's renewable energy transition will also generate broader economic benefits. While the New York State Business Council has expressed concerns about, quote, colossal leakage under the CCPA, meaning that businesses and jobs will leave the state because of higher energy costs, this concern is unfounded, and in fact, the opposite is true. If anything, the CCPA is a solution for the significant leakage that is already happening under the old energy system. For example, only about 10.5% of New York's primary energy needs are supplied by in-state sources. Out-of-state energy expenditures averaged approximately $38 billion a year between 2005 and 2015, and more than $460 billion over that total period. Getting to 100% renewable energy means substantial insourcing of power production, mainly from on-site renewable sources such as wind and solar, as well as significantly reducing New Yorkers' near total reliance on imported unrefined fuels. And I just want to underscore those same researchers that I mentioned project that it will cost about $30 billion a year to meet the timeline of the CCPA, significantly less than the $38 billion that's flowing out of state because of our dependence on fossil fuels. The point being that if you look at those numbers side by side, the renewable energy transformation effectively pays for itself. So the bottom line is exceptionally clear. New Yorkers will enjoy substantial economic gains under a comprehensive renewable energy transition as proposed in the CCPA. Thus, the self-interested question offered by opponents of the energy transformation we so clearly need is literally turned on its head. How can we afford not to achieve zero greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide by investing in complete and accelerated renewable energy transition? If they care about jobs, opportunity, and well-being for people of New York, that's what our elected leaders should be asking themselves. And thankfully, many are. Thank you for your leadership.
Next up, Wes Dillingham, Pepe Banda, and Megan Martin.
Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to come here and speak. Catskill Mountain Keeper has already submitted written comments and testimony, and Albany and my colleague earlier submitted testimony. So I'm going to take this opportunity to tell a personal story. I am Wes Dillingham, co-founder and associate director of Catskill Mountain Keeper, but I'm also here today as a co-founder and owner of Wild Roots Farm. And it was very exciting to see so many other farmers testify. I'm usually the only one that knows anything about manure cows or vegetables and these things. So, Catskill Mountain Keeper, well, let me go back. I'm going to do this in 5 minutes, but I'm going to start by talking about when I lived in Maine in 1988. I listened to George Mitchell, then Senator George Mitchell, make a public appearance and speak about environmental issues facing Maine and the nation. While talking, he talked about the risks of climate change and everything we were facing. And I quote, "A crucial juncture in policy making is when it becomes clear that the risk of inaction is greater than the risk of action." That quote was from August 14th, 1988. Since then, we've had multiple catastrophic fires, hurricanes, droughts. That was before my wife and I got a lease on a piece of property in the Western Catskills. We took out a lease on prime soil. We did a lot of research to get that lease. We made sure that that field hadn't flooded since the 40s. The year we started was the worst drought in 50 years. The following year was the wettest year on record. We used to run around and joke. We were like, we're all set. We survived that. So we kept growing our business. But we had no idea the extremes that we'd face over the next 10 years. We started losing track of the extremes, at least until the floods came. According to the United States Geological Survey, we had 200-year floods and a 500-year flood in a 5-year period. Those were not named storms. That wasn't Irene, Irma, Hugo. They were just isolated thunderstorms that sat over the ridge between our two communities and flooded both communities. The 500-year flood took out all our deer fencing, drowned 3 of our tractors, our irrigation equipment, and 60% of our topsoil. Topsoil that I had spent the last 10 years improving by adding compost and cover cropping and rotations. Counting time and labor, I calculated that the flood, I had spent, after the flood, I had spent over $60,000 on soil improvements. We were sequestering carbon and soil and improving our production at the same time. All of this went downstream with that flood. That was 2006. We finished out the growing season. Missing only 2 weeks of delivery that year. We kept the lease for another couple of years, hoping to rebuild that business. But then something else happened in 2007. Fracking landmen came to Sullivan County and started looking for leases on gas. We retreated to our farm and decided the only investments we were going to make were up on the ridge at the farm on our property that my dad had purchased in 1957. This is about the same time that I co-founded Catskill Mountain Keeper with other partners. And this is the same time that Catskill Mountain Keeper, Damascus Citizens, and Citizens for Safe Energy started sounding the alarm on fracking. The fracking story is an important metaphor here, because what happened with fracking? When we started, nobody knew what fracking was unless you were from the industry. You looked it up, it wasn't there on the internet, but we found it. And in 7 years, we went from what is fracking, and I'm going to apologize to all English folks, people that know what haiku, I'm going to do what's called a farmer haiku. Fracking, what is it? Natural gas, energy, money, 8 million gallons of toxic chemicals, 8,000 feet down, breaking up rock, truck traffic, water pollution, skin rashes, pollution, pipelines, leaks, methane, 84 times as potent as greenhouse gas. Our homes, our water, our air. No fracking way. That's what we need to do with climate change. We need to act. Wait, 30 seconds. Okay. 30 years, politicians, scientists have been talking about this. The Climate and Community Protection Act does multiple things to protect communities and people. It has a comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory. It takes into account upstream emissions of natural gas for electric production in other states. Promulgation of regulations to achieve the statewide greenhouse gas reductions. It has a climate justice working group, and most importantly, it helps people affected first and most from the impacts of climate change. And it includes a process for evaluating that progress every 4 years. It's time that off the couch, pass the Climate and Community Protection Act. And I'm going to finish with another haiku real quick. Climate change, fossil fuels, consumerism, greed, working together, equity, responsibility, pushing people, pushing elected officials, our representatives, people, not corporations. Pass the CCPA, save ourselves now.
Good afternoon. My name is Pepe Banda. I'm an economist. I came to this public hearing from Westchester County to express my support to the CCPA. I believe that passing the CCPA as a law is the right thing to do now to reduce and stop greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. This is an effective tool to address the most important problem that our children would be dramatically facing if we don't take urgent corrective measures. In particular, I support the CCPA's objective to accelerate the transition to clean and renewable energy from all sources of greenhouse gas emissions. I appreciate that the proposed CCPA has a broad and a comprehensive scope. Let me highlight the fact that greenhouse gas emissions come from various sectors and sources, not only from power generation. Electricity generation accounts for 17% of the emissions in New York State, 17%, according to the data provided by the latest NYSERDA's greenhouse gas inventory. Therefore, the goal recently announced by the governor to achieve 100% clean power by 2040 represents progress, but it is insufficient. A strategic focus only on electricity would address less than 1/5 of the climate change challenge in New York State. The other sectors that need transformation in their energy sources are transportation and buildings. According to NYSERDA also, the transportation sector accounts for 33% of the emissions, and building sector accounts for 26% of the emissions. Both sectors together, transportation and building, represent almost 60% of the emissions. To address the challenges in these two sectors, we need to set up specific and radical goals for each of them. We also need to develop all public policy with participation of communities, innovators, and private sector towards implementing the already existing technical solutions at a massive scale. There are solutions, but we need to take them to a scale. The CCPA outlines the governance mechanism to carry out a comprehensive transition process. The document defines clear mandates for the state administration with the guidance of a multi-sectoral climate action council. A scoping plan on how to achieve zero emissions from all sources by the year 2050 is one of those governance mechanisms. Intermediate and incremental goals from now until 2050 have been defined to keep the energy transition process on track. Under CCPA, the state administration will establish a mandatory registry for all major sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Those entities that generate the greenhouse gas emissions will record their emissions on an annual basis. That will create accountability. The resulting consolidated report will be shared with authorities and all New Yorkers every year. I consider that the CCPA comprises the necessary key elements of a sound system to address the climate change challenge from the collective perspective of New Yorkers. Thank you very much.
Is Megan Martin here? Okay, then we're gonna move on to Lauren Thorpe. Okay, I will be quick. A lot of people have already touched all the political stuff. I'm not involved. I am not even representing an organization. I'm a local volunteer, and I am very passionate about this policy. I'm a fourth generation Cold Springer, and our town has been changing over in Phillipstown, but there's a lot of people that range from all realms of the political spectrum. But the environment has been an important issue to them. My father and his father are lifelong Beamers, which out-of-towners don't know are IBMers. Dad's going on his 38th year right now. And my mom, who was raising us, she eventually took a break and dove back into law, and she graduated law school when I graduated high school, and she is the district attorney in our Putnam County right now. So from a young age, my parents told me to pursue what my passion is, and I didn't realize my passion was kind of formed by the Hudson Valley in which I lived in, was raised in. The fact that we couldn't go swimming or fishing in our river because of the PCBs that were dumped there 50+ years ago. The fact that my grandma was working at a battery plant that is now one of the Superfund sites that are in our town. And that we would get annual reports and testing from the Indian Point nuclear plant that is 10 miles from where I grew up. So all of these things that formed who I was made me question, did these people know at that time what their actions were and the impacts that they were going to have on future generations? And maybe naive or maybe just optimistic, I did not think that